In a small town, a little girl's broken bike led to a moment no one expected. A kind mechanic, a struggling single mom, and an innocent wish would change everything. This is not just a story about fixing a bike. It's about hope, kindness, and love. You're watching Kindsoul Stories. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe, and tell us where you're watching from. Now, let's get started. In the small town of Brooksville, Ohio, life moved at a slower pace, but struggles carried their weight just the same. Ethan, only 28, spent most of his days inside a modest bike repair shop that had once belonged to his late father. The place smelled of rubber tires and motor oil, with tools neatly lined on rusted racks and a small radio playing soft country tunes in the background. Ethan wasn't wealthy. His earnings barely covered rent and groceries, yet he had a reputation that set him apart. People said he never turned away a kid whose bike was broken. For him, it wasn't just about repairs. It was about giving children the joy of movement, the freedom to ride without worry. That evening, as the sun dipped low, casting warm orange light over the small town, Ethan wiped the sweat from his brow after finishing up his last job. He was ready to lock up when he noticed a woman hesitantly standing by the doorway, holding the hand of a small girl. Laura, a 30-year-old single mother, looked exhausted from a long day at her job. Her clothes carried the faint scent of cooking grease from the diner where she waited tables. Life had not been easy for her. Widowed, too young, and left with a daughter to raise, Laura worked double shifts, scraping by just enough to keep food on the table. Her face carried quiet strength, but her eyes betrayed the fatigue of endless responsibility. Beside her stood Sophie, just 7 years old, clutching the handlebars of a small pink bicycle. The bike's front wheel sagged at an odd angle, the chain hung loose, and scratches covered the once bright paint. Sophie's big brown eyes sparkled with hope. Despite the broken bike, she wheeled into the shop. For her, that bicycle wasn't just a toy, it was freedom, her chance to chase down summer afternoons with friends. Yet now, it sat damaged. Her dreams slowed to a halt. Laura's voice trembled as she finally spoke. "Excuse me, sir. Could you take a look at her bike? She really loves it." Ethan noticed the hesitation, the nervousness in her tone, as though even asking for help carried the weight of guilt. He crouched down to inspect the bike, running his grease-stained fingers along the bent wheel and broken chain. "It's fixable," he said after a moment, glancing at Sophie with a reassuring smile. The little girl's lips curled upward, her grip tightening on the handlebars. Laura, however, quickly interjected. How much would it cost?" Her words carried quiet dread, as though the answer might crush what little hope she had. Ethan looked at her work-worn hands, the worry in her voice, and then back at Sophie, whose entire world seemed to hinge on his response. Slowly, he shook his head with a gentle smile. "Don't worry, this one's on me." For a moment, Laura froze. Her eyes widened in disbelief. It had been years since anyone had offered her kindness without asking for something in return. She wanted to argue, to insist on paying something, but her throat tightened and the words wouldn't come. Sophie, however, reacted instantly. Her face lit up with uncontainable joy, and she clapped, her small hands together. "Really? You'll fix it?" she asked, her voice trembling with excitement. Ethan chuckled softly, nodding. "Of course. Every bike deserves a second chance, right?" Sophie giggled. The sound so pure, it tugged at something deep inside both adults. Laura lowered her gaze, whispering softly, "Thank you. You don't know what this means." Ethan rolled the bike into the shop, motioning for Sophie to sit nearby while he gathered his tools. Laura followed, still hesitant, unsure if she was imposing, but Ethan worked with an ease that put them both at peace. Sparks flew lightly as he straightened the wheel, the metallic clink of tools filling the small space. Sophie leaned forward, her chin resting in her palms, eyes wide with wonder as she watched him bring life back to her beloved bike. The shop glowed under the warm light bulb above, and for the first time in a long while, Laura felt something unfamiliar relief. She sat on a small stool in the corner watching Ethan work, and a thought crossed her mind. Why would a stranger care this much? As the minutes turned into an hour, conversation slowly began. Ethan asked Sophie about school, about her friends. And the little girl eagerly shared stories about her classmates, about how she once raced down the street and dreamed of riding all the way to the park on her bike. Again. Laura listened quietly, her heart tightening at every word. She had worked so hard to keep Sophie happy, yet moments like these reminded her of how much her daughter truly missed out on. "She's bright," Ethan said softly, glancing at Laura. "Kids like her deserve the world." Laura smiled faintly, hiding the tears that threatened to rise. "She does, I just wish I could give her more." The sincerity in Ethan's eyes made her pause. Most people dismissed her struggles or looked at her with pity, but he seemed to genuinely care. The sound of Sophie's laughter as Ethan made a silly face while tightening a screw filled the garage. It had been weeks since Laura had heard that kind of laughter from her daughter, and it felt like music. She realized that in this small moment, in a dimly lit garage with a stranger, her daughter's childhood joy had been restored, even if, just for a while. The kindness was simple, but it was powerful enough to leave an imprint on her heart. When the repair was finally finished, Ethan wheeled the bike over. It looked brand new, the chain oiled, the wheels straight, the paint carefully polished. Sophie gasped, running her tiny hands over the handlebars. "It's perfect," she squealed, hopping onto the seat. She pedaled in small circles inside the shop, her laughter bouncing off the walls. Laura placed her hand over her mouth, overcome with emotion. She hadn't seen her daughter this happy in months. Tears filled her eyes, though she tried to blink. Hid them away before Ethan noticed. But he did notice. He simply smiled and nodded, as though silently saying she didn't need to explain. Laura reached into her worn purse, fumbling for a few crumpled bills. "Please, at least take this. You've done so much." "Already?" Ethan raised a hand, shaking his head. "Keep it. Buy her something sweet instead. Seeing her smile is enough. Payment for me." Laura's chest tightened, and she lowered her eyes to hide the tears streaming down her cheeks. Sophie, still riding the bike, suddenly stopped. She hopped off, ran over to Ethan, and threw her small arms around him. "Thank you, mister. You're the nicest person ever," she said with childlike sincerity. Ethan's heart swelled, his rough hands awkwardly patting her back. It was in that exact moment that the words slipped out, unplanned, but filled with the innocent truth only a child could voice. Sophie looked up at Ethan with her wide, hopeful eyes and said, "Please, marry my mom." The shop fell silent, the sound of those words hanging in the air like a spark that couldn't be ignored. Laura froze, her cheeks turning crimson. "Sophie!" she exclaimed, embarrassed beyond measure, but Ethan only chuckled softly, kneeling down to meet Sophie's gaze. "That's a pretty big request, kiddo," he said gently. Still, as he glanced at Laura, standing there flustered yet beautiful in her exhaustion, something deep within him stirred. The innocence of the child's wish was simple, but it planted a seed, one that would soon grow into something none of them expected. The silence that followed. Sophie's innocent words stretched longer than expected. Laura's cheeks burned crimson as she fumbled to hush her daughter. "Sophie, sweetheart, don't say things like that," she muttered, her voice trembling between embarrassment and disbelief. But the little girl only grinned, as if she had spoken the most natural truth in the world. Ethan, crouched beside her, couldn't help but laugh softly, though the sound carried warmth instead of mockery. He ruffled Sophie's hair, saying gently, "You've got quite the imagination." Yet as he straightened up and glanced toward Laura, their eyes met briefly. In that fleeting connection, something unspoken lingered. Curiosity, vulnerability, and a flicker of something deeper. Laura wished desperately for the ground to open and swallow her whole. Life had made her cautious. She didn't invite strangers into her heart. And yet, the mechanic standing before her wasn't just anyone. His kind refusal to take money, his patience with Sophie, his quiet smile, it all felt disarming. She cleared her throat, clutching her purse tightly. "I'm so sorry," she said quickly, avoiding his eyes. "She says things she doesn't understand." Ethan shook his head, still smiling. "Don't apologize. Kids see the world in ways we forget." His words, simple yet sincere, struck her harder than expected. She wanted to dismiss them, but deep inside, they resonated with the loneliness she carried for years. Sophie, meanwhile, rode the bike in joyful loops, giggling every time the wheels spun smoothly. Ethan leaned against his workbench, arms crossed, watching her with quiet satisfaction. For years he had lived alone, his life revolving around grease, tools, and the faint hum of his shop. He had never thought much about companionship beyond the occasional friendly wave to neighbors. But now, standing here, listening to the laughter of a child and the soft voice of a mother, something stirred inside him, a warmth he had almost forgotten existed. It wasn't love yet, but it was something equally powerful, the realization of what had been missing all along. Laura gathered herself, brushing a strand of hair from her tired face. "We should let you close up," she said, motioning for Sophie to come over. But Sophie shook her head, pouting. "Do we have to go already?" she asked, disappointment flooding her voice. Ethan chuckled. "You can take one more lap," he said, earning another burst of laughter from the little girl. Laura exhaled slowly, torn between gratitude and unease. Gratitude for the kindness Ethan had shown, and unease, because for the first time in years she felt something unfamiliar safety. It had been so long since anyone lightened her burdens, even for a moment, that she almost forgot what it felt like. When Sophie finally dismounted, clutching her bike with pride, Ethan walked them to the door. The evening air outside was cool, the faint scent of cut grass drifting through the quiet town. Laura hesitated, her hand tightening on Sophie's shoulder. "Thank you again," she said softly, her voice heavy with sincerity. "I don't know how to repay you." Ethan looked at her, his expression steady. "You already did," he replied. Confused, she tilted her head. "How?" His smile widened slightly as he gestured towards Sophie, whose grin still stretched from ear to ear. "Seeing her happy is more than enough." Laura blinked back tears. She had fought so hard, alone, to give her daughter joy. Tonight a stranger had given it freely, without expecting anything in return. As they left, Sophie rode her bike slowly down the sidewalk, her laughter echoing in the quiet neighborhood. Ethan stood at the doorway of his shop, watching them disappear into the fading sunset. For the first time in years, he didn't feel the usual heaviness of solitude pressing down on him. Instead, he felt a strange pull and ache to see them again. He told himself it was silly, he was just a mechanic. Laura surely had her own life, her own struggles, and he didn't belong in it. But no matter how he reasoned, he couldn't shake the warmth that lingered after their departure, a warmth that made his small, lonely shop feel emptier than ever before. Laura and Sophie returned to their modest apartment that night. It was nothing fancy, just a two-bedroom above a laundromat. But it was home. Sophie talked endlessly about Ethan as she wheeled her bike. "Inside, Mom. Did you see how fast it goes now? He's the best mechanic ever. I told you he should marry you," she said with innocent certainty. Laura's face turned red again, her laugh coming out more nervous than amused. "Sweetheart, it doesn't work that way." But Sophie pouted, folding her arms. "Why not? He's nice. He made you. Smile. You don't smile much anymore." Laura froze, her heart aching. Out of the mouths of children often came truths adults tried to bury. That night, as Sophie drifted off to sleep with her bike parked proudly beside her bed, Laura lay awake, replaying the events in her mind. Why had a simple act of kindness unsettled her heart so much? Back at the shop, Ethan closed up, but sleep didn't come easy for him either. He kept seeing Sophie's hopeful eyes, hearing her little voice saying those unexpected words. And when he thought of Laura, her weary face that softened into rare smiles, his chest tightened. He had no right to feel connected after just one evening, yet something about them lingered. He poured himself a late cup of coffee, staring at the old photograph of his father, hanging on the wall. "You'd probably laugh at me," he muttered aloud, but deep inside he wondered if fate had just nudged his life in a new direction. Over the next few days, the bike shop felt unusually quiet. Ethan busied himself with repairs, but the memory of Laura and Sophie kept drifting back. Sometimes he caught himself glancing at the door, half expecting them to walk in. Meanwhile, Laura wrestled with her own thoughts. Every time she saw Sophie happily pedaling around the neighborhood, her heart swelled with gratitude and confusion. She had promised herself long ago never to lean on anyone again. Trusting people had only led to heartbreak. And yet the mechanic's kindness lingered like a light she couldn't extinguish, no matter how hard she tried. One Saturday afternoon, fate intervened again. Sophie's chain slipped loose while she was riding near the park. Laura tried to fix it, her hands fumbling, but Sophie insisted, "Let's take it back to Ethan. He'll fix it in 2 seconds." Laura hesitated, torn between practicality and the butterflies she felt at the thought. But in the end, Sophie's enthusiasm won. Together, they wheeled the bike back to the little shop. Ethan looked up from his workbench, surprised but visibly pleased. "Back again so soon?" he asked, his tone light. Sophie nodded eagerly. "My chain fell. You're the only one who can fix it." Ethan laughed, kneeling down. Laura, standing quietly, felt the heat rise in her cheeks as she caught his gaze. Something about being back in that warm, grease-scented shop felt oddly like coming home. As Ethan worked on the bike again, Sophie chattered happily, while Laura found herself smiling more than she realized. Ethan glanced at her now and then, noticing how her guarded expression softened when she laughed. He realized he wanted to hear that sound again when the repair was done. Sophie hugged him without hesitation. "Thanks, Ethan, you're my hero," she declared. Laura's heart tightened at her daughter's words, but she didn't scold her this time. She only whispered, "Thank you, again." Ethan looked at her seriously, his tone gentle but firm. "You don't need to thank me. Sometimes people just deserve a break." And in that quiet moment, surrounded by the hum of tools and the scent of rubber and oil, the walls around Laura's heart began to crack. The days that followed seemed to slip by more gently, as if the world itself had slowed down to make space for something new. Laura noticed it first in the little things, how Ethan would stop by with a bag of groceries, insisting it was just extras he couldn't use, or how he offered to check on her old car. Whenever it rattled, she tried to protest, but his quiet persistence always softened her resistance. Sophie, of course, adored him. To her, Ethan wasn't just the kind mechanic anymore. He was someone who listened, who cared, and who made her laugh like no one else could. One chilly afternoon, Laura found herself waiting outside the shop while Ethan adjusted Sophie's bike for the 3rd time that week. She leaned against the wall, arms crossed, but her eyes kept drifting toward him. He was focused, brow furrowed in concentration, his hands steady and sure. There was something deeply reassuring about watching him work, like he wasn't just fixing a bike, but holding the pieces of her fragile world together. She caught herself smiling and quickly looked away, embarrassed. She had built such strong walls around her heart, but now cracks were beginning to appear. Sophie was the first to notice the shift. "Mom, you smile more when Ethan's around," she said bluntly one evening while brushing her doll's hair. Laura froze, her cheeks warming. "Do I?" she asked, trying to sound casual. Sophie nodded, her voice full of certainty. "Yeah. You don't even know it, and I think he likes you too." Laura laughed softly, though her chest tightened. Out of the mouths of children often came the truths adults were too afraid to say. She brushed Sophie's hair, whispering, "Maybe some things aren't that simple." But deep inside, a quiet voice asked, what if they could be? Ethan himself wrestled with feelings he hadn't expected. For years, his life had been simple, predictable, even lonely. But now each day seemed brighter. He found himself listening for Sophie's laughter outside the shop or waiting for Laura's hesitant knock on the door. At night, he lay awake, thinking about the way Laura's eyes softened when she wasn't on guard, or how Sophie's innocence brought light into every room. He told himself not to hope, that Laura's life was complicated and his own was too small to matter. Yet the pull he felt toward them only grew stronger with time. One evening, Laura's car broke down again, this time on the side of the road just outside town. She called Ethan, her voice hesitant but filled with quiet desperation. Within minutes he arrived, his truck pulling up beside hers. "Hop in," he said gently, rolling up his sleeves. Laura wanted to protest, to insist she could handle it, but exhaustion silenced her. She sat in his truck with Sophie, watching as he worked under the dim glow of the streetlight. His figure bent over the hood, hands moving with quiet confidence. In that moment she realized how much she trusted him more than she had trusted anyone in years. The drive back to her apartment was quiet, but comforting. Sophie fell asleep in the back seat, clutching her doll. Laura sat with her hands folded in her lap, stealing glances at Ethan as he drove. She wanted to say thank you, but the words felt too small for everything he had done. Instead, when they reached her building, she whispered, "You've already done so much for us. I don't know why." Ethan parked, turned to her and met her eyes. His voice was steady, almost tender. "Because sometimes people come into your life and you just know you're supposed to be there for them." Laura's breath caught, her heart pounding in her chest. From that night on, something changed. Ethan became more than a kind stranger. He became a presence in their lives. He fixed the leaky faucet in Laura's kitchen. Without being asked, he showed Sophie how to oil her bike chain properly. He even brought over an old toolbox and told her she could keep it. "Every girl deserves her own set of tools," he said with a grin. Sophie beamed with pride, and Laura found herself laughing in a way she hadn't in years. The loneliness that once filled their small apartment began to fade, replaced by the warmth of something that felt dangerously close to family. The town began to notice too. Neighbors who had once pitied Laura now saw her walking with Ethan and Sophie, their laughter echoing down the street. Whispers spread, gentle and hopeful. People liked the idea of the hard-working mechanic and the struggling single mom finding happiness together. Laura, however, remained cautious. She told herself not to get carried away, that kindness didn't always mean forever. But every time she tried to keep her distance, Sophie's laughter or Ethan's steady gaze pulled her back in. It was as if fate itself was gently nudging her forward. One evening, Sophie insisted they all sit outside together while she rode her bike in circles. The sun was setting, casting golden light across the quiet street. Ethan and Laura stood side by side, watching as Sophie pedaled with pride. Laura's heart swelled at the sight of her daughter's joy. She turned to Ethan, her voice barely above a whisper. "You've done so much for us," she said, emotion breaking through her words. Ethan looked at her, his expression unreadable, then spoke softly. "Maybe it's time I do even more." Laura's breath caught. In that moment she realized that Sophie's innocent wish might not have been so childish after all. The silence that followed was heavy, but not uncomfortable. Laura's heart pounded as she met Ethan's gaze. She saw no pity there, no judgment, only sincerity, and something else she hadn't dared hope for, love. Tears stung her eyes, though she tried to blink them away. "I don't know if I can do this," she whispered, her voice trembling. Ethan stepped closer, his tone gentle but firm. "You don't have to decide tonight. I just want you to know I'm here. For you, for Sophie, for as long as you'll let me." His words wrapped around her like a promise, steady and unwavering. Sophie rode up just then, her cheeks flushed, her grin wide. Mom, Ethan, did you see me? She shouted excitedly. Laura knelt down, brushing a strand of hair from her daughter's face. Yes, sweetheart, we saw everything. She looked up at Ethan, her heart aching in the best possible way. For years, life had been a battle she fought alone. Now, standing here with Sophie's laughter in the air and Ethan's presence beside her, she felt something she hadn't. In so long hope, not the fragile kind that fades with disappointment, but the strong, steady kind that builds into something lasting. That night, after Ethan walked them home, Laura lingered by the window watching him drive away. Sophie had fallen asleep instantly, exhausted from her excitement. But Laura remained awake. She thought about the journey that had brought them here, the struggles, the loneliness, the unexpected kindness of a man who had asked for nothing in return. She pressed her hand to the glass, her heart heavy yet full. Maybe love wasn't about grand gestures or perfect timing. Maybe it was about someone showing up again and again until you realized they were the missing piece you'd been searching for all along. And so, in that quiet town in Ohio, a simple act of kindness had blossomed into something extraordinary. A mechanic who once lived in solitude, a mother who carried her burdens alone, and a little girl who dared to dream of love had found themselves standing at the edge of a new beginning. The wish Sophie had blurted out so innocently was no longer just a child's fantasy. It was the spark of a real story. A story of second chances, healing, and the possibility that sometimes the people you least expect turn out to be the ones who change your life forever.